Well, we've all got one. It's the second week in January. Usually this is when they always come out. And if you're here in Nova Scotia, you just got one of these, which is your property assessment. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, because we've had a lot of questions just asking why market value and assessed value are not the same. So let's start looking at exactly what it is on this piece of paper and how they get their numbers. Hey everyone, well, it's the start of January and we've all just had this little piece of paper, and this is the example we're going to use today to basically help you understand a little bit more about what exactly your property assessment notice is, how do they get the numbers, and what you can do to appeal about it, but more importantly, like, where do some of these numbers actually come from and how does it relate to market value? Because that is the question we get asked all the time. Is this property is assessed at $260,000. We're putting an offer and it's on the market at $460,000. Why is it such a big difference? So let's ask that one first of all. Now, we're going to use my property assessment for 2023 because that's where we are in January, and we want to look at exactly what's going on there. So the first thing to notice is who creates them and what are they exactly for? Well, here in Nova Scotia, we have something called the Property Valuation Services Corporation. They work for, yeah, you guessed it, the government, and they are the government body, supposedly independent, but how can you be independent when you're paid for by the government? Think on that one for a while. But their job is basically to assess all of the properties in the whole of Nova Scotia and come up with, obviously, your new assessed property value for the year. So how do they do that? Well, there's a few methodologies that they use. The first one is if there's actually been a sale on the subject property, let's say my house, and it's subject and it's gone through and it went and triggered a market valuation on the property. So instead of them just blanketing the whole area, they find my property, they see that a sale took place, they look at my market value, 460, and they look at my assessed value, 260, and they say, little bit of a difference there. That's the first flag that is going to show my property then as ready for a reassessment of value in whatever year they're looking at it. We're using 2023 because that's where we are right now. So how have they actually figured that out? Well, guess what? They have the data feed from all of the information from the MLS, Canadian Real Estate Association, and that's where they're going to find all of the properties that sold and all of the values that they sold for, plug them into their giant database, and guess what it throws up? Here's all the ones that sold in 2022. Here's all the assessed values. Let's start looking at the differences between the two, and they will be reassessing them. Now, I always say to a lot of my clients, they might not catch up with you in the first round, and it may take a good 6 to maybe 8, maybe even 12 months, but you're living on borrowed time, basically. If you bought a house and the assessed value is way lower than what you paid for the house, it's just a question of time. Now, they're not going to all of a sudden go assessed at 260, bought at 460, we're assessing you at 460. It might happen in rare circumstances, but in my experience with my clients and what I've done recently, I've never seen it get that close to the assessed value so quickly. They're more than likely going to gradually step it up over a certain number of years to actually get there. So that's who's doing the work, and that's one of the first triggers. Now, what they do next for, let's say, all the properties that haven't actually sold and triggered a market value flag, they're basically going to look at the whole area, and it's fairly specific in the areas. They're not just going to go, well, it's the whole of Nova Scotia went up by 2.4. Everybody goes up by 2.4 if you've not sold. What they're going to do is to go to each specific area and work out what the increases have been, and then start saying, well, okay, look, if you're in the whole of Fall River and Fall River went up by 2.6%, we are going to blanket assess everybody who didn't sell and buy up by that same number. So that's how they're roughly going to do it. Now, I'm not from PVSC, I'm not working for the government, so I don't know exactly how they do it, but that seems to hold true when you start looking at the information that we've actually got from some of those assessments versus the market values, etc., etc. So now let's look at, because there's 3 boxes on here. The first box tells you that it's residential taxable, commercial taxable, etc., etc. The second box then says, what's the assessed value? So that would be, for instance, let's say it's assessed at $460,000. The next box over actually is an interesting one. It's called the capped assessment. Now, if that box is blank, it means you are not capped, and therefore you're going to be assessed at whatever the assessed value is. My property actually is in the cap program, and I have a capped assessment, which is a lot lower than my market value. That means that the capped value is what I'm paying the property taxes on. So now we get into the next question. How do they figure out the cap program? Well, you can go to pvsc.ca, I think it is. Yes, it is, if you're in Nova Scotia. And you can actually start reading up on that cap program and apply to actually get your property in that cap program, which means that you're not going to go up by some of the jumps that I've been seeing, particularly in my assessed value. Because on the back here, there is literally the assessed values and the capped assessed values for the last well, this goes back to 2018 to 2023, so we're talking 5 years. Now, what that means is that I can actually see, well, okay, how has my assessed value gone up and how has my capped value gone up? My assessed value from 22 to 23 went up by $87,000 on the assessed value, but my cap only went up by $24,000 because the cap program is designed to see a much smaller increase based on something like the consumer price index. Maybe there's a couple of other things that they throw in there to actually get that percentage increase. But it's always a lower increase than on my assessed value. Because like I say, 22 to 23, my assessed value went up by roughly $80-something thousand, but the cap only went up by 25. So what I'm paying taxes on is my capped value, which is at the moment roughly $90,000 lower than my assessed value. So would you rather pay taxes on your assessed value or the lower number, which is the capped assessed value? Lower capped assessed value. So the big thing now starts to look at, well, okay, there is this cap program, pvsc.ca. If you're in Nova Scotia, go to the website, have a look at it and see how exactly you get your property into that capped assessed program. But when you start looking at market values, this is where you start to see the difference, because the assessed value is only based from the Property Valuation Services Corporation and is only there for the purposes of property taxes. Market value is all about what a willing buyer and a willing seller will pay for the property. So it's clearly going to be much different from the assessed value. There used to be, once upon a time, quite a long time ago, that the market values could actually be lower than the assessed value. Pretty sure now that that's not actually the case. So now you start looking at, well, okay, if my taxes are based on my assessed value, but my assessed value is lower than the market value, like basically what's going on there? Well, it's just a natural supply and demand. We know that over 21 and 22, that the house prices in Nova Scotia have gone up a lot. And basically that's why we're seeing market values so much higher. Will the assessed values catch up? At some stage, maybe, but it's pretty unlikely. Like, it always seems to be that the assessed value is lower than the actual market value that we're paying. So that's everything about this wonderful little piece of paper that we've all just had. It's property taxes, we've got to pay them, there isn't much choice, but it is absolutely within your ability to go and see about this cap program, get your property in it and pay lower property taxes, or at least for the first year, it's probably going to stay the same because your assessed value and your year one cap value is going to be the same. But if your assessed value goes up by like this, the good thing is you're in the cap. It's not going to go up by this much. It's going to go up. It's going to go up, but it's going to go up a lot less. So that's the reason the cap program exists. Go onto the site, check it out, and if you have any questions or you want any further information, drop some comments down below and we'll do our best to answer them.